Are you looking for a great story? Do you love Star Wars? Do you like podcasts?
If you said yes to any of these, check out the Redemption Podcast.
Well, I have less in my head than you do normally, probably.
You haven't met the crew I'm with. Pretty much everywhere we go, our life is in danger.
Things didn't explode. That's pretty sneaky for us.
That sounds horrible.
Yes, please finish up whatever underhanded thing you're doing on the computer terminals at the Jedi Temple.
Check out Redemption Podcast at www.redemptionpodcast.com.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Intricasso. Today on the show, I am talking to Amber and Rudy about non-combat focused role-playing games. We have an amazing chat. They are two of the best people around, so it is always great to chat with both of them about a subject near and dear to my heart, non-combat focused RPGs. We define that, get into some of our favorite games in the genre, how to run them and make them exciting. It's something that I have struggled with for a while when I first started playing role-playing games, and so I'm happy to bring our opinions and thoughts to you. Here is my conversation with them. All right, everybody, now I am here with two of the greatest people in the whole universe. Rudy and Amber, welcome to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the tabletop role-playing game world? Rudy, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Rudy Basso. I'm one of the co-owners of the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Yay!
Never heard of it.
Nope. I also played in the Demon Plague podcast, which I edit, and I also edit Behold Her, and I also edit a lot of other cool gaming podcasts, some of which are affiliated with the network, but not on the network. I think Amber can illuminate us on that. And some other stuff in general. So, hooray!
Woo! Amber, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
So, hi, I'm Amber, and I'm a graphic designer and illustrator, and I've been doing a lot of freelance logo design, illustration, and page layout for TTRPGs recently. I'm also a co-owner of the Geekspective podcast network, where I play on a show called Tales from Moxbury, and I have my own AP called Shapeshift, where I GM, and Rudy edits both of those.
Yay!
That's right. Rudy just has his hands in everything.
Yeah. Oh, you can watch Tales from Moxbury on our Twitch channel.
Oh,
too.
yeah. Yep. It'd be, well, I don't know when this will come out, but every other Saturday, 7 p.m. on the Don't Split the Podcast Twitch channel, we play Godbound.
A system that is interesting.
Yes, it is super, super fun. And I am excited to talk with you all because today's topic is non-combat focused role-playing games. And this includes role-playing games that may have some sort of combat system, but are not necessarily focused on combat, right? So we're going to discuss also games probably that have little or no combat system at all in them. I'm eager to talk about this because I think some of the things that we're going to talk about are also good advice for games that maybe do focus on combat, but not every session, right? You could play a D&D game that does not focus on combat as well. So some of this advice will be applicable in other areas, but also we're hoping to open your mind and turn you on to some new fun games as well. So I am looking forward to this. Let's talk a little bit about, define our term here. What does a non-combat focused game mean? What are some games that have light combat, and what are some games that have no combat? Amber, let's start with you.
Sure. So, actually, I was going to have a discussion with you guys because I'm interested in how you guys also basically see combat versus non-combat games. Because in my mind, when I think about games that have combat, I think about how you have to mentally shift gears or go into an actual phase. Now we're doing combat. Everybody turn your page over or look at this part of your sheet or whatever. And so that's kind of how I'm seeing, there's an actual dedicated, this is combat phase. Is that how you guys see it too?
Yeah. And I certainly think, a game like Dungeons and Dragons, which I totally love, right? Most of your abilities, even for classes that are not like as heavily combat focused, are still very, like I would say most of the abilities you get are useful in combat. A lot of the spells are meant to be useful in combat. So yeah, when I think of a combat focused game, I think like we're rolling initiative and time has slowed down to bullet time now because we need to be extremely precise with every single action that happens.
Sure. So I think like when I think of heavy combat, it's usually a lot of, like you said, bullet time, and there's going to be like a high level of computation or like several systems or steps to do combat. I'm just looking at there. If you don't know me, you'll know very shortly that I love Ryutama, which is a game that I have the most experience jamming. And there is a combat system in it, but it's not really pushed. Like the focus of that game is travel and journeying, but you will experience, and they do have a combat system, but it's very, very light. Like you're usually only rolling, your initiative is based off of something, a modifier, or gosh, I haven't even used combat enough in that system to even know the rules really, because it's something we do so little of in the game. But it's like usually only like 4 steps. Here's what you have to hit. You're trying to match initiative with somebody. You're trying to hit something. Roll your 2 dice and do your damage. That's it. And even the magic is very similar in combat, where it's like, roll your spell. You did it, and here's the damage that you've done. That's all that combat is in Ryutama.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, even if they're games like Monster of the Week, which has a more of a combat focus than maybe some other Powered by the Apocalypse games, combat is you're not rolling initiative. You're still making moves and that kind of thing, the same way you are outside of combat often. And so I think of those not necessarily as non-combat focused. I mean, I guess they're more non-combat focused than something like D&D, but they're less, their mechanics aren't extremely combat focused.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, where it's a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse, like there is harm involved, but it's not really like the focus. And there's not really like we're moving into combat phase now. It's you made a move and harm is done. And it's kind of just like a back and forth.
Rudy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think part of it, James, and Monster of the Good Week is a really good example, is that combat isn't the focus because a lot of times it's ineffective. Like shooting something is not the answer to your problems. I think another game, just a lot in general, is Cthulhu kind of games. Like there's plenty of, you can do a Pulp Fiction game where you're driving around in old-timey cars shooting monsters with Tommy guns, but you can also play a game where guns are not the answer, and maybe in the end you do destroy something, but it's a huge buildup, and it's more like one roll to set the explosives, not knifing some cultist or whatever.
yeah, I think that's totally true, right? And in Monster of the Week and in a lot of Cthulhu games, if you are going to fight something, it's like a puzzle, right?
Yes.
What is the weakness for this thing? How do we trap it? How do we, it's not, like you said, it's not stabbing something over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's one big part of it. I think another non-combat focus is that the consequences of fighting or killing someone are dire. So I think of a game like Star Trek Adventures, where you're essentially space explorers who have the prime directive to follow. And I think killing someone is a huge problem within that universe. Like, you are the goodest guys as Star Trek, as Starfleet members. Or a game like Bubble Gumshoe, where you're high school students. You can't murder someone and get away with it as a high school student. That kind of goes against the nature of the game. In fact, if you were to even hit someone, you might be suspended or what's permanent expelled.
Expelled.
Yes. See, I don't know what any of those are because I was such a good student. I didn't even learn the terms.
Well, that's funny, Rudy, too, because I was thinking about like Blades in the Dark, where it's like, even in that, when you're doing heists and stuff, they don't want you to be, I mean, the system is basically saying,
heat.
Taking heat. You don't want to kill or make a loud explosion or draw attention to yourself because it gives heat, and that is a detract. Like, that's something you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, if you kill someone in Blades in the Dark, it's because you have failed to solve the heist in a good way. At least if it's a great GM like a certain Josh Long I know, who always discouraged murdering people
Yes, yeah.
and was often ignored by his players. I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I only maybe stabbed a couple times, but I don't think I
Sure.
ever murdered anybody.
Yeah, and it was always so. Just talking about that, when talking about Tales from Moxferry, which was a Blades in the Dark actual play, when you all did kill someone, it was like a big moment. Like your character's rival, it got to the point where you're like, you know what? Let's just everybody just like took out their swords and killed her, and it happened almost instantly because 6 versus 1 in that game, the one is going to lose very quickly. And it was like an exciting moment. Wow, they're actually killing someone. This is crazy. And that's kind of one of the cool things about these light combat games. When it finally comes down to throw down, it's a big deal and it's an exciting climactic moment.
Yeah, I often think about it, right, in terms of films and movies, right? That often when someone dies in a story, it's like a big deal, right? We're like, whoa, X died. Even if they're like a minor character, we have that because in real life it is such a big deal to kill somebody, and there are major consequences. Rudy, I think Bubble Gumshoe is a great example because there are some Gumshoe games that are certainly heavier or more focused on the combat, right? Night's Black Agents has a lot of thriller combat rules that make things exciting. I would say it's less like Night's Black Agents is less combat focused than D&D, but Bubble Gumshoe is like way, way, way not combat focused for those reasons. And I think what it gives you is a chance to tell different kinds of stories. In some cases, a more realistic story. And in some cases, a story that, just for whatever reason, combat doesn't have a big place in it. When we talk about Ryutama, Amber, like there are occasionally monsters and things like that in the world, right? But the focus isn't killing them and taking their stuff or
No.
whatever it might be.
No, not usually. I mean, I guess you could theoretically run it that way.
But why bother play Ryutama if you're going to go around killing stuff?
Exactly. It's kind of detracting from the whole, like, what the purpose of that game is and other, like, more in-focus mechanics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think so I know for me, I run a lot of D&D. I design a lot of D&D. Combat is like a safety net, right? Because of that shift, Amber, that you're talking about, right? That shift of like, now we are in this place where time slows down and everything can be a little bit more precise. And like, I know how to make a fun combat, like bring in a monster that's pretty exciting, makes everybody go, ah, and like some environmental effects. And we're good to go, and things will happen, and dice will roll, and we'll interpret those, and you have like a safety net there that is these rules are familiar. We know how this goes. It's like watching an episode of The Simpsons, right? We know that probably by the end of this encounter, the characters will have killed this monster, and everyone will be happy again, right? Like it's like, yeah, we did this thing. So how do people like me get comfortable running non-combat games if they're used to running combat-heavy stuff? Rudy, let's start with you.
I mean, I think you use that prep time that you would have used for combats in other things. Like, there still needs to be conflict in the session or overall in the long-term campaign. I think leaning on, like, making your NPCs really fun to interact with, just to talk to, is a big part of it. Really dive deep on their personalities. If they're a major part of your game, don't make, farmer number 4, don't tell me about his life. I think in general, even though these games aren't combat focused, there is another focus to them. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of times, like you mentioned, I talked about Bubble Gumshoe, but Gumshoe games in general are about a mystery to solve. You know what I mean? And even something like Star Trek is usually episodic. There's a mystery to solve. Even Cthulhu, there's a mystery. So I think in general, if you're playing an RPG that doesn't involve sorting someone, it's probably there's some issue that needs solving through non-direct conflict means. So there's still plenty to figure out and do. Just don't have the answer be this person is caught, they take out their sword and attack you.
And then I'm thinking, like, from as far as like I'm the opposite. Like I don't personally enjoy combat. Like it's a thing that as a player, I've never really like, I don't really enjoy doing math. So sometimes it's very hard. Like I played D&D for 7 years and I just try to be a spellcaster because I don't really have to do much other than roll a bunch of D6s or, D6s for fireball or whatever. But so for me, I started out GMing. I basically went to games that I was very comfortable with because I liked role playing. I liked the more character, like actual interaction, social stuff. And so I guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but for people who tend to like combat stuff, do like that crunchiness, the system stuff. So a lot of the non-combat focused games we are talking about have a lot of system stuff to it that maybe you can find enjoyment in. I think Blades in the Dark is a good like middle ground system thing because there's a lot of tracking and figuring out like how things go. And I don't know, that's kind of just like my thoughts on it for as like a personal preference, or like if you're thinking about personally, how do I go into this? Maybe there's something you like about combat that you can find in a non-combat focused system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And finding some, middle steps, I think are a great way to go as well. The other thing that I think about is from the other side of the table, right? There are a lot of players who, when they sit down, it's almost like, oh, I've played so much D&D and Pathfinder or whatever. Like, I don't know how to engage with a system that I don't stab my problems. What advice do you have for either for players or for GMs who have players who like want to play a non-combat focused game but aren't sure how to get into it?
Session zero, session zero, session zero.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be having a long-term game where if one person starts a fight, it kind of ruins things for everyone, which is very possible in these games. A lot of times the combat, when it happens, is incredibly lethal. So if someone decides to shoot the wrong guy, now, the Cthulhu monster is going to eat all of you. And that's because this is how the game is made. And congrats. Thanks, Ray. You just ruined everything. So I think it's really important that everyone knows what we're going to be doing getting into the game before we even start. And, example of play is good. Example of consequence is really a good way to kind of show your players, if you're a GM, hey, this can go south really, really fast. Like, it takes this many rolls, and now you're dead.
Right. I was just thinking about, so talking about Tales from Oxford when we played Blades in the Dark, I talk about how I didn't like combat. Like, I don't personally am drawn to that, but I played D&D for so long that even I, person who does not enjoy combat inherently, struggled to get into Blades in the Dark because I just wanted to stab my problems away because I was kind of used to that. And Josh had to be very like, no, that's not what your character is. Like, look at your play sheet. Like, look at what you're doing. I think that's another thing too, is like, as a player, like, look at what's given to you for like Blades in the Dark. I was playing a hound. Like, I'm supposed to be sneaking. I'm supposed to be surveying. That's what I'm supposed to be good at. I can do anything I want to do, but like, use the mechanics of the game to really help you drive what you are doing as a player character. And then as a GM, like Rudy said, it's like you kind of have to like say, okay, well, you try to do that, but I remember you probably edited out all the frustration in that first episode, Rudy, because I think both me and my brother were just like, I don't like this game, because we were having that hard transition. But we talked through it, like, and then again we had another talk as a group as this is what this game is. So try and shift your mentality about like how you would approach it, and then look at what your character can do, and use it as your guide. And also the reward system, because Blades in the Dark has a reward system for, hey, did you do your beliefs or express your traumas or your heritage? Did you do that?
Yeah.
Then you get XP. So there's also game systems that kind of, the reward system itself helps with actual RP and away from that combat.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, is that as long as communication is clear, as the GM, you will probably have to step in and be like, this is kind of not how the game should be played, if that makes sense. Like, don't be afraid of that. If the players know that this is a non-combat game, then they'll understand and they'll try and adjust and come up with a new, probably way more creative and fun way to solve the problem.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think communication obviously is one of the big things that's coming through here. So, Amber, you're playing in a Zweihander game now, and you posted your notes for like, hey, this is how I learn to work in new systems, and I thought that was fascinating. And I thought like, oh, this is something that I think could apply to non-combat systems, right? And spellcasting in Zweihander isn't necessarily a combat activity either, but it was very cool because you also posted a thing about how combat works, and I was like, oh, this would be great for like sitting down to right. Well, why don't you talk about it? You did it. It's your method.
Sure. So basically, when I'm learning a new game, it's like, what is this game's like main thing? Well, Zweihander has tons to it, and it's really about the group, whether we're going to be doing a lot of non-combat or if we're going to be doing a lot of combat. And I just want to make sure that I am understanding what the game wants me to do as a player. And so, yeah, I sat down, I wrote out the things that are important to, especially because I was playing a spellcaster, how I'm going to cast spells, how the, I just take notes like I was in school essentially. And so I think if you want to apply that to like non-combat, the game I think about is Monster Hearts 2, where like the emphasis is strings, right? So it's like, if I was to sit down, after session 0, we kind of did our little like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what this is all about. This is what the skin that you chose. I think I would take time to go, okay, strings. My character, how would my character want to leverage things on people, or how would I do that? And I kind of just like write that out for myself because it gives me ideas. Even in games where they don't have inherent built-in belief systems or like instincts, kind of like Burning Wheel does. I do that every time for even games that are combat, because I want to be able to have my character have motivations and be able to act. So, for instance, I play in a non-content creating game, Dungeon World. It's my pure, like, I can just, my pajama pants game, right? I don't have to be good. Like, I don't have to be on, essentially. It's just me playing a game. And I sat down with my character, another spellcaster, but I wanted to be able to make my character, I wanted to be able to play my character to have like things that the GM could take for it and build into the world, and like what are their beliefs and their instincts, so I can like actually act as my character instead of going, what would Amber do? I go, what would Sprinkle do? My little gnome spellcaster. And I just write 3 things. He loves candy and will always want to get candy. Things like that, just to help you like focus on what your PC wants in this world.
Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press and the Empire of Ghouls, the Underworld Player's Guide, and Underworld Lairs. Empire of the Ghouls is an Underdark campaign for levels 1 to 13. The matching Underworld Player's Guide includes new playable races from Darrow to Dark Trollkin to Drow and Mushroom Folk, plus new spells, subclasses, and backgrounds. The Underworld Lairs book includes standalone Underdark adventures for levels 3 to 14. The whole package is available now from koboldpress.com and on Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds for online play. You can find out more at koboldpress.com. Tell them DSPN sent you. Let's get back to the babble. So, when we think about then non-combat focused games, what types of challenges and drama can keep the game exciting? Rudy, you talked about mystery, that solving a mystery, which I think, when we think about a lot of our fiction that we watch, most of it revolves around solving a mystery. House, Law and Order, sometimes it's criminal, sometimes it's medical. There's a lot of that in our sort of everyday television, and certainly in novels and comic books and things like that. What else do you think helps keep non-combat games exciting, Rudy?
So I think, and I normally hate inter-party conflict, but if the game isn't about killing each other, then maybe having some conflict between the players is a fun idea. When you're doing character creation, you can tell your players it's okay if you want to be at odds with each other. We can find a way, like if you're both Starfleet officers, for example, and you're rivals or something like that, then I think it's fun then to have a friendly rivalry with another player. I think in general, if the game isn't so much about fighting people, it needs to be really about the characters and the player characters. So I think dedicating session time to what are you doing? What are you thinking? Try and get side scenes going within your PCs is a really great idea, because there's so much more story to tell when you're not spending that time fighting people, right? Combat usually takes a long time.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think a lot of games, have good conflict among player mechanics, right? There's a lot of fun games about doing everything from being teenagers who are infighting with each other, like shopping at the mall, to people who are maybe in the field of war together, and one of them is a traitor, and they got to figure that out, right?
Sure. Yeah, just like the scene in the trench where everyone's just talking about their, lives before becoming soldiers. Classic movie trope that is some of the best parts of war movies. So that's another great example.
Or you could be a bunch of rabbits and you're worried about, the flood that's coming because it's springtime and you have to find another place to live.
Yeah.
I love the war. I love the war. And it's so dramatic and it's no combat and it's all about survival.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that's another great example, right? I love to look at video games because now we have a lot of non-combat focused video games in the indie game sphere coming.
Yeah, I based a lot of my Ryutama stuff off after Undertale, where it's combat is not always the answer. You could try lots of different things.
Yeah. So tell me, what sort of challenges do you end up putting in a game like Ryutama?
Yeah. Okay. So this is one of the first sessions I edited. The characters fell into a hole and they couldn't figure out how to get out. But there were a bunch of magical talking mushrooms in the hole that said they would show them how to get out if everyone told them a story. And that was I'm like, oh, this is a special game right here. I loved it. And it was so fun and cute. And everyone told like wonderful, like there's a fish person in the group and he told a story about fishing and it was great. Like that's so good. Like give the players a problem they can't solve physically and make them find a way to solve it creatively.
Sure. And like, that's like, I'm so glad you remember this. Because I was like, what have I done in Ryutama that was a challenge? I think I've done the last one. We recently just ended the first basically season of the campaign, and I did my first puzzle build. I think that's a good opportunity to also introduce puzzles into non-combat. If you're not focusing on a lot of combat, then you have opportunity to introduce puzzles. I love social drama. So, they're traveling, but they go into towns and usually they need money or they need resources. So they do jobs, but they get caught up in the NPC's personal drama. One of the challenges was they met a guard and he invited them to their birthday party. And then all of a sudden they're like, and he's like, I expect gifts. And so now they have to figure out how to get him gifts. And it becomes a whole, like something that was just a throwaway gag ends up becoming a 3-session overarching story. How do we get this guard's presence and will he like them?
Yeah, I think actually that guard in particular is a great example of you, Amber, pivoting to, oh man, the players really like this aspect. In this case, it was your voice. They really liked the voice that you were doing for that character and just wanted to talk to you more. So you ran with it. You're like, oh no, but they have to move on and, fight the wizard under the temple. You're like, okay, no, we're just going to sit here and I'm going to talk as this guy. And you're going to ask me questions and I'm going to answer them as this guy. And that's going to be an awesome and long part of the session. It was great.
So how do you all then prepare? We talked about you'd spend the time that you would normally spend on combat on something else. But like, what exactly are you preparing? How are you preparing? Because the other thing that I think is safe about combat is it's like you can plan out a session pretty well in a combat focused game because you know about how long the combats will take, and you can say, cool, whether they go left or right, I'm going to throw down an ogre. So it doesn't matter, right? Like maybe they'll meet the ogre in the forest, maybe they'll meet the ogre in a cave, but either way, this ogre is showing up. I feel like with a non-combat focused session, time feels like it's more in the player's hands. and how do we deal with that? And is that okay?
I focus on three things when I'm trying to prepare for a session. One is like, how do I engage my players? Like, what are my players enjoying? Like Rudy said earlier, like they love that NPC voice. So I try to think, okay, well, if they loved it that time, maybe if I do another ridiculous character, I'm going to do that. So I really focus on what's going to engage my players, what they like. Then I won't think about how to engage my players' characters because they have PCs with motivations and goals and stuff. And so I want to be able to present that, and not even always like positive things. Like sometimes I'm like, so-and-so's character is going to hate this. And it's going to create in-game conflict, right? So it's engaging my players' characters either positively or negatively. And then how do I engage the game's core mechanics? Like what do I actually want mechanically to show up this session? And so specifically thinking about Ryutama, the system I'm most familiar with, I kind of, at first I started planning really hard. Like I used to plan like at the very beginning, like I would write out a lot of stuff. And then over time I got a little bit looser, but I kind of thought about things like in 30-minute cartoon sessions. Like that's kind of like how my brain sees things. And so I would sit down and go, okay, so they're going to go to this town. Here's everybody who lives in this town. What kind of people live in this town? What kind of things are in this town? Shops, stuff like that. Even like, what's the weather going to be like? Are they going to have to find umbrellas or talk to somebody or whatever? And then I think about like, what's going to annoy or be good for a character. And then I kind of like write things out in like, I call them beats. I just go, okay, they're going to get to town. They're going to meet so-and-so, and they're going to get to X location. And usually if I do 3 beats, like 3 like goals for my group, typically it ends up being 45 to 60 minutes because God knows what I know they're going to do a lot of stuff in between talking to themselves. And that's kind of how I prepare for Ryutama, my game, my campaign specifically.
Yeah, I think establishing your beats, or if it's like a mystery game, knowing the solution really clearly is really important. And I think also having a handful of ways to slow your players down might be important. Because if they figure out the mystery in the first 5 minutes, one time I was running a game and they're like, oh, geez, well, it must have been the jug of the Gatorade was lined with a poison. And I was like, oh, God, oh, God, oh, God. I had to find some way to throw them off for the next 3 hours. So I started leaning on, this was Bubblegum Shoe, started leaning in on the other NPCs who they were interacting with and kind of finding other ways to distract them or put obstacles in their ways. Throwing out red herrings. You gotta be throwing them out like a fishmonger if they figure it out immediately. You know what I mean? You gotta have that backup ready, because it's more fun to have them end the session not solving it than having them end it an hour in, and then it's like, okay, well, did anyone see Detective Pikachu? Like, you have to find ways to then fill the 2 hours that you have planned to hang out with your friends, which is not a bad thing in any means, spend time talking to your friends. But yeah, I think that's another aspect of preparing for these games is find ways to extend the session if they can figure out the solution faster. Like, you can't fall back on combat being long and taking a while.
Oh, yeah, you're so true. Because like you brought that up, and I was thinking about like, yeah, I usually do 3 beats, but I usually have like at least 2 other things they could potentially run into, just in case they get too far or like they decide to not do something that was presented with. And it's like, okay, well then, I think that's why for me with Ryutama, why it was so important for me to like know the world that they're in. So it's like, okay, if they go to Stormbrook, there's literally 5 businesses I know they can interact with, and at least 10 characters that I've written up that I can inject life to improv wise. But maybe like they interact with it in and then I can just start a whole drama and see where that goes just with improv. But yeah, so that's kind of like, right, like I have to have extra things just in case they blow past a bunch of stuff.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I like that. And I like that a lot of games are built in ways that put more power in the player's hands to create narrative, right? So that when they go off the rails and a player does something, the player is the one who has to say, this is what happens next, or this is where I'm going, right? This is where, at least where the scene takes place, or that kind of thing. And that can be helpful too, especially if we're talking about like a Powered by the Apocalypse game or something like that. So, what do you all think? We've mentioned a couple of games here, but what are some of the best low or no combat games for GMs who are used to combat focused games, and players too, groups really that are used to combat focused games? Rudy, let's start with you.
Yeah, so it's a very specific kind of game. Obviously, Bubblegum Shoe you play as teenagers, and like I said, punching people isn't the goal, but there is a specific mechanic that's social combat in that game. It's called Throwdown, and it plays similarly to like a D&D initiative or something like that. You kind of attack someone, a lot of times it's embarrassing them in front of their friends, or they can get pretty deep, pretty high schooly, I'll say, in maybe a bad way. But again, that's why you have safety nets as well whenever people play these kinds of games. But I think that's a really good game because you can still kind of have that standoffish conflict, but it doesn't involve murder or hurting someone or anything like that. So, the game is still about solving a mystery. So that's my example. I think Fiasco is another. We didn't really talk about that. That's a game. It's really like a kind of group storytelling game. I think it's a great introduction because, I like Fiasco a lot. And again, there is no combat system whatsoever in it. And it's a one and done, and it takes like a couple hours, and you can like help each other out a lot. That's a big part of it, is that because it's group storytelling, it's not like, all right, now it's your character's scene and you have to do everything. It's like everybody can get involved and help out. So I like Fiasco a lot for that too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the great things about Fiasco is it also sort of prepares the whole group to know what the GM will be going through then in a non-combat focused game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which I think is great because then they also understand sharing that burden a little more and helping each other out and creating a story together, which I think is really cool. Amber, what do you think about good starting games for people who want to get into low, no combat game?
Sure. So I have a background of basically playing exclusively D&D or Pathfinder for like 7 years straight. And so I think I'm kind of biased in just the fact that it's like, nostalgia bias, where it's like the first like non-combat focus, or like I would say light combat was Dungeon World, where it's like, yeah, it's powered by the apocalypse, but it had a lot of the same familiar things that I was used to playing D&D for so long, that when I went to it, it wasn't hard to grasp concept, right? Like, okay, I'm still doing dungeon crawling-esque things and I'm still doing these kinds of stuff, but we had a lot more narrative control to be creative. Like before, I had never ever thought of what my spells would look like. Like I literally would just be like, I cast magic missile, I do X. But Dungeon World really helped. Like I had a lot of like, well, what does that look like? GMs that were running it for me. I'm like, I can tell you what this looks like. I didn't know I could do this. I was just so used to just fireballing everything and not really thinking about stuff. So I really like Dungeon World as a, like, if you're looking for that middle ground, like my players have been playing, fantasy, D&D, like this is what they're used to, maybe try and introduce them to, like, because you can be, it's collaborative storytelling, right? I really like Dungeon World a lot. Of course, I love Ryutama. Surprise. And then I'm trying to think of other games. I really like Fiasco too. Like you said Fiasco, I was like, oh yeah, gosh, it's such a good, like, low stakes. Like you just sit down with your friends, but it's like a good like exercise tool for storytelling. So if you're like, how can I get my players used to like this kind of dialogue? Fiasco is a great like just storytelling tool. I love Monster Hearts 2 is a really good one. Dread.
Oh yeah,
Dread is
excellent.
awesome.
Dread is a great example. Yeah.
Dread is like, using a Jenga tower. There's no combat, but it still feels like high tension stakes when you do stuff.
Yes. Oh, I don't know, but that's a game where the mechanics fit the theme so well because it's a horror game. It's called Dread. And pulling that piece has huge consequences if the whole tower falls over. So you'll have people on the edge of their seats over a Jenga game. Oh, it's so... I love Dread.
It's very, very good. Every time I play Dread, I've sweated through some part of clothing because I'm so nervous about doing it. But it emphasizes that storytelling aspect too. And then you really when you go to pull, you're not usually doing combat. Sometimes you are. It's also an interesting combat system. I've had pull offs between two characters before, but it's not really focused on that. So those are the ones I think about when I think about low or no combat games.
I like Alien RPG. The new Alien RPG is really good because fighting an alien is like the stupidest thing in the world you could do. So you kind of have to figure out ways to not fight aliens because they can like one-shot you in that game. Oh god, I love the new Alien game so much.
It is super, super fun. Yeah. And so that's a great point. I think when we think about non-combat focused games, there are a lot of things that can still be action oriented or horror oriented or, but they're just not necessarily as focused on the combat, or there is no combat, but oh my god, it's still scary, or it's still there's still tension, there's still drama, there's still story. I think talking to your group is probably the best advice because everybody can go in it together, right? And say like, look, we're all going to depend on each other, we're all going to rely on each other to tell the story, and we'll put the power in each other's hands and stuff. And that always seems to go great when you can have a conversation like that with people.
Talking to your group is the best advice ever you could give someone with a rough life. And probably life. Communication is so important. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I was going to also say, just from like being a socially anxious person myself, and like 10 years ago, like if you told me I would have to play a game, or I would be playing games that I would try to do a lot of convincing other characters to do stuff, or I would never have done that. And I think having a good group of people that you all buy in, like, we're going to do this thing and it's fine and it's okay. Like you're not going to be judged. Let's just try it, is super helpful. Like, I don't think I would have gotten where I've gotten without my really good supportive, like good communicating home group of players.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. But before we go, Rudy Basso, where can people find you?
Hey, you can follow me on Twitter at Rudy Basso. Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com for a lot of great podcasts. Our newest one, Dark Fortunes, is really super cool. Not like most of the D&D APs you've heard before. Listen to Demon Plague. Not like most of the D&D APs you've heard before. That's probably it. I narrated some audiobooks. Check out Your Best Game Ever by Monty Cook Games on Audible now.
Holy crap. Yes, absolutely. I didn't realize that was up now, Rudy. Amazing. Yes, you can listen to it there, where the one and only Rudy Basso reads some amazing essays and content from Monty Cook. So it's good stuff. Amber, where can people find you?
Yes, so you can find me on Twitter. It's where I basically live, at Rocket Orca. And you can find my actual work at rocketorca.com. Where I actually list all the shows, and there's my portfolio and everything that's up there. And you can also go to geekspective.com, which has all of my Geekspective podcasts and stuff. I'm on the Don't Split the Podcast Twitch on every other Saturdays for Tales from Moxbury. And currently, as of this recording, Monday nights, I'm playing Swahinder. The title of the show is Eat the Rich, and it's being run by Adam Coble.
Is that twitch.tv
/ Adam Coble. It's on his actual channel.
That is amazing. Yeah, that's great. Super, super fun. Well, people should definitely check that out. Thank you both so much for joining me today on Tabletop Apple. I really appreciate it. That was a great chat with Amber and Rudy. You know, people, Tabletop Babble could use your support. Head on over to patreon.com/Intracasso. That's patreon.com/Intracasso, where you can support the show by sending a few dollars our way. I would so appreciate it. Also, there are some rewards there, but the real reward you get is supporting the show you love. Or hey, maybe you've already done that. Thank you so much if you have. Or you can't. Hey, I totally understand. Thank you for listening. Another great way you can help us, head on over to Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. Seriously, it helps grow the show. It means a lot to me. Means a lot to everybody who works on the show. Means a lot to DSPN. Means a lot to the listeners. So head on over to Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. If you do, I'll read it out loud. You can make me say anything you want. That's fun. And hey, if you're listening in Apple Podcasts right now, guess what? It's going to take you 15 seconds to pop on over and just hit those 5 stars. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Intracasso. That's at JAMESINTROCASO. Also, check out my blog, worldbuilderblog.com, for all the cool game design stuff I'm doing, plus a lot of other extras. If you play 5e, there's a lot there. If you play other games, I'm writing about other games. I'm writing GM advice. I'm writing blogging advice. I'm writing podcasting advice. It's all up there. Go check it out. Tabletop Babble is edited by Nate Pauzenga. It's a show on the Don't Split the Podcast network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding that network with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. If you're having fun, you're doing it right.
Leave behind the safety of the Humblewood and travel down the Tangrip coast to the Bay of Palouche, home to both the Kingdom of Den and the Serpent Domain. But neither hold the true power of the Bay, for that lies in the sea itself and the pirate lords that call her tides their own. The dread pirate Captain Bluebeak, Tiberius Fang, Kin the Bladeless, and Gabrielle LaFleur, the self-proclaimed pirate queen. Each one vying for power over the very tides themselves. But do any of them really have what it takes to hold up the legacy of the briny bulldog? Tune in each week to find out if our little crew has what it takes to stand up to the pirates of the blood-soaked waters. Dark Fortunes is available every Monday on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Set sail for high seas adventure.